And women's football, we don't play for the money. So don't insult the game by offering something like £75 because we don't play for that anyway.
Hello guys, I'm Nicole and welcome to That's the Tea. Now, we're going to be doing things a bit differently today because this is a special episode all about money. Now, we've spoken about money a few times before on this show, but there are so many stories that we thought we'd dedicate a whole show to it. Makes sense, doesn't it? But I can't do it alone. No. So I am here with ex-Juventus, Chelsea, Lioness striker and qualified lawyer, Eni Aluko. Just casual. I like reeling that off. Makes me feel really bad about myself. Sports journalist and friend of the show, Lloyd-Hughes.
All these intros are just so much like, I don't know, after that I feel like...
Oh no, you're embarrassing me.
Not yourself, I know. It's okay, we'll work on it. We'll get you a qualified journalist soon, a qualified lawyer soon.
Yeah, I don't even have a journalist qualification.
Don't tell them that, Flo, they don't need to know that.
I have a degree, but not in like that, so...
Okay, well this is awkward. Moving on.
The wrong tea to spill.
No, I know, it's embarrassing.
And sports journalist Sophie Lawson, who hopefully does have a...
Do you have any qualifications?
Now we're going to start with you, Eni, because you were back in England.
Yes.
From Italy.
Yes.
Firstly, how was it? I'm going to pick up my cup of water now. Go on.
It was
take
good.
the floor.
No, I think I think a lot of people think because you come back from somewhere, it was all negative. Not at all. I think it was very much mission accomplished for me. It was like I went out there, wanted to experience something new. Learn a new language, can speak broken Italian now.
All right, come on, say something.
Okay, di dove sei?
Sure. I don't know why I asked you because I don't know if you're actually speaking Italian, but...
I could be speaking something else. But yeah, so I went out there, won trophies, and then it was kind of like, okay, well, what now? And I feel like it was very much kind of the objective of going out there was very much realised after 18 months, and then I started missing home, and a lot of things were kicking off for this year that I didn't want to put on hold. So it was a great time. I learned a lot, I grew a lot, and back in London.
How different is it playing football out there? I mean, you've probably been asked that quite a lot, but
yeah, it's different. It is different because I think the league is still growing, and it's probably 5 years behind where the WSL is in terms of just the level of exposure to the fan base. The competition is good. I think the top four, Fiorentina, Juventus, Roma and AC Milan were competing. I mean, we only won the league by 1 point last season. So it was pretty tight. I think the Italian Women's League doesn't get enough credit for that. But it's getting there, and I think now they've gone professional in the Serie A Femminile. So it will continue to grow and improve.
Let's start with something very current, the FA Cup. We all like the magic of the FA Cup. What's not
Big
so...
winner over here of the FA Cup.
Woo,
2015.
represent. But what's not so magical is the difference in prize money.
Not so magical.
Not quite that magical between the men's and women's FA Cup. So, I mean, you probably all know this, but the winning club in the women's FA Cup get £25,000. The winner in the men's FA Cup get Sophie's like, 3.6 million pounds. So quite similar, really.
So close to each other, you can barely tell there's a
So
difference.
close, yet so far. So, I mean, firstly, why? Why is there, so quite an obvious question, why is there such a big difference?
So, in my opinion, I don't think there really is a justification for it. I think there's a history of why these things are the way they are, and a bit like the FIFA Women's World Cup, the FA have shown that they have increased it over time, just like FIFA have increased the prize money for the women's. And, I think every season they release a press release saying, it's gone up by this much every year, but obviously there's still such a big gap. And I think we will keep complaining about the kind of instability in terms of financial terms for women's football as long as the prize money is as low as it is, because women's teams won't be able to invest if the only way to invest is relying on the support of your men's clubs. And that's why teams have been so successful so far, is because they've had a men's team behind them who's willing to support them. But that's only going to continue if the prize money isn't there. You're going to have to keep relying on those sources of income if you're
Yeah.
not going to get any prize money. I mean, like, you literally look at it and think, well, what's the point? Really,
Yeah, and that
gap?
level, I mean, because that's not a minor difference. That's quite
I mean,
insane.
Sophie, you
isn't
did
it?
a piece on it recently,
Well,
right?
well, I'm going to pause you there
Dive in.
because I have a cute little tweet from Sophie here. Right, I'm going to try and do this justice. I'm not saying it should be equal. I'm just saying the 40 men's teams that make it to the 4th round of FA Cup qualification and lose make more than 298 of the teams in the Women's FA Cup. Mic drop.
That sound, yeah. I was, just before the draw, I was looking at the prize money. I was thinking, this is ridiculous. And I think if you're a women's team who loses your preliminary round, you're right in the first round, you get £75, which why?
Ballers.
What is the point of that?
So, I mean, I think that's disrespectful. I think actually that, like, you either do it properly or you don't do it. And, you know, women's football, we don't play for the money. So don't insult the game by offering something like £75 because we don't play for that anyway.
Yeah.
But I think essentially it all comes down to broadcasting and broadcasting money. The reason why, you know, the FA Cup in the men's is so skewed in terms of the prize money is because BBC or whoever has the rights is willing to pay that to have the FA Cup on. I think part of the problem with women's football is because the FA have invested for so long, when the money comes in, it's like, let's keep it.
Yeah.
They struggle to then redistribute it out into the game. Whereas, you know, as you said, actually, if you think about it, that £3 million that's going to the winner of the men's, it's not actually going to do anything to their game. Why don't you balance it out and maybe give half to the men who win, half to the women, and that will then have a trickle-down effect? Because it's not always about the winners either. What about the teams that get to the semi-final and quarter-final? You know, it should have a trickle-down effect, and I think that's the problem with women's football in general, that there's no redistribution of the money. 10 million comes in from Barclays, it's like, oh, FA keep it, and don't necessarily distribute that out to the Bristols and the Yeovils who really need that money.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So it's one thing to rely on big sponsorship deals, which is great that we're seeing more of that, but surely, there's somewhere else that they can start, right?
I think historically as well, not even just women's football, but the whole of women's sport, cash investment is quite minimal in terms of sponsorship, in terms of broadcast rights. A lot of it is tied up in marketing spend and grassroots projects. Same with the Barclays deal. The Barclays deal is fantastic for grassroots girls football. You know, the pledge in England that every single girl is going to get the opportunity to play football at school is an incredible pledge, but at the same time, that's not necessarily going to trickle down that much into the professional game. There is a cash fee to it, but historically, a lot of women's sponsorships are all about marketing and kind of value and things like that, and assets, you know, for example, sideboard advertising or some kind of school project or whatever the scheme may be. Very little of it is like we see in men's sport, where it's, we will pay you £2 million for the naming rights to this project. A lot of it is just a value. So the Barclays deal is a great step forward, but obviously, like Eni said, the trickle down doesn't really come that much, because same with broadcasting. In women's sport, historically, broadcasting is all about, we'll cover the production costs and we'll get you exposure. There isn't yet we really want that deal and pay you £10 million for it. Whereas, you know, the way the FA Cup men's deal is, they get an amazing amount of money for international broadcast rights, not even domestic rights. So they're cashing in.
And there's always I think with the broadcasters, there's a big excuse. It's well, you know, we can't pay for the rights or justify paying for the rights when there's no one in the stadium. I've had conversations with TV executives, and that is literally the reason why they're not going to pay the X amount of rights for a women's game, which then affects the prize money. So it's all kind of a knock-on effect, chicken and egg effect. It's like you've got to fill the stadiums before you get the broadcasters, before the broadcasters pay, before it trickles down.
And also when we look at, you know, it was only the FA Cup in the men's game a couple of weeks ago, and so much of the conversation was like, oh, you know, the FA Cup's dead. And then the other side of the coin, it was, yeah, but if you're, you know, Rochdale and you get a replay, you know, that could run your club for another 2 seasons. Yeah. And so actually for smaller clubs, it's vital. Whereas, like Eni said, you know, Lewis's game against Blackburn at the weekend was cancelled. The cost of travel that they wasted, 75 quid. If you drew someone who was about 4 hours away, 75 quid, you actually would probably think it's not even worth.
Well,
it's not even worth travelling.
This
because
is
you're not even
clubs
you're going
lose
to lose
money
so
in
much
the
money on it.
So the
What's
BBC
point?
have reported that they know of at least 2 clubs who have lost money through the cost of away
I mean,
times.
probably a lot more than that
Yeah.
as well. That's 2 who have admitted it.
I want to talk to you briefly about your role in helping negotiate the central contracts
Yeah.
with the Lionesses. I mean, how involved were you with that?
Yeah, I was pretty involved. I think at the time there was a lot of discussions amongst the group, like, you know, we've done well at the World Cup, we've obviously played in the Olympics, we're more prominent in the media, our contracts need to improve. And somebody kind of needed to lead that. And because I had a legal background, I was able to understand the sort of nooks and crannies of the contracts and was able to then explain that to the team in layman's terms. So I sort of became the voted representative, if you like, of the team, and we sat down collectively and said, listen, you know, we all need to buy into this and push to make sure that we're getting in improvements. And they were incremental, it wasn't life-changing money. When I left the team, I think the central contract was 25 grand a year, and then you get 5 grand sort of bonuses for appearances. Not life-changing money if you're playing for England, but it was a much improvement from when I played under Hope Powell, when it was like 16 grand a year. So I'm not sure what it is now, but I'd like to think that having a central contract and a good salary with your club makes a very good, you know, professional living for women's football, which is what it should be.
How important were those contracts then for you guys?
Oh, they were massive, because a lot of us were working alongside playing. So for me, working as a lawyer, which is, you know, trust me, a full-time job, particularly as a trainee, it was like you needed that break, you needed that respite, and a contract that was going to almost pay you for your time, so you could give up your full-time job. Because a lot of us were taking unpaid leave, so it was like a double whammy. You were taking unpaid leave, you weren't getting paid enough. So when the central contracts came in, you could then say, all right, I'll quit my full-time job so I can focus on football for a decent salary.
Okay, now we've spoken briefly about sponsorship. So we've seen with Boots, Barclays, Visa. How important, how massive is this for women's football?
I think it's exciting, and I think it brings other people on board, which is what's really important. I mean, like I mentioned, a lot of it won't necessarily be direct cash, if that makes sense. But it does bring visibility, and it brings kudos, and you know, it makes other brands step up and say, oh well, if Visa are doing it, then we should definitely do it. Because before, I think people viewed women's sport as you know, a cheap and kind of it makes you look good sort of prospect, you know, like, well, it gives our brand credibility and it's a bit of a bargain. Whereas nowadays, because of the exposure, Women's World Cup, you know, WSL, all these things, netball as well being, you know, on a massive growth, it's actually now of like, oh, well, we could get a massive return on investment now. If you look at what Barclays have paid for that deal compared to what other women's sports competitions have got, it is like well above and beyond. Because if you look at, you know, the English women's rugby union tournament in here, where they've got, I think it's not a massive league, but that was sponsored by Tyrrell's, the crisp company, and let me tell you, it was a pretty cheap deal. So what the WSL have got as like compared to that is impressive.
Massive,
so
yeah.
it's great, it's good news.
I want to ask you guys about this quickly. So an independent valuation consultancy brand Finance, have estimated that the total potential worth of sponsorship in women's football globally is undervalued by over $1 billion.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, why do you think it's undervalued?
I think it's undervalued because the value proposition is not seen. So it's very difficult to value something if you don't see where it's going. And it's very much kind of every 4 years like the world goes, oh my God, women's football, oh my God, like this is breaking records, broadcasting records and viewership records, and then it tails off. So it's very, very difficult to say, okay, on a weekly basis, this is how much money women's football is bringing in for broadcasters, for clubs, for the Football Association. On a 4-year basis, that's much easier to see on a World Cup once in a while. So I think globally that's a problem, because where the attention from the World Cup, how do we turn that on a weekly basis? And I think the WSL have tried to do that this year, obviously with the opening week, big men's stadiums and getting a lot of eyes on the game. But I think that is the biggest challenge for women's football around the world. It is to make sure that on a weekly basis, people have the habit of paying their money and turning up. And I think that's where it's very difficult for brands to go, okay, we're going to invest in this and know what we're getting back on a regular basis. Yeah,
it's carrying on that momentum, isn't it? But don't you feel like it is changing? Because that's a great point that we were saying, that every 4 years, every however often, everyone goes, ooh, and then it kind of dies down again. But don't you feel like, obviously we all work in women's football, it feels like it is changing in that sense?
I would say that the World Cup last year, it did feel like it.
A different shift.
Like the viewership records in Brazil and stuff were balmy. And like, you've now got more people interested in the national teams all around the world, but it's the domestic side that we struggle with.
Yeah.
But I think more and more people are waking up to the fact that people do want to watch football. It's not just, it's not, women's football, no one cares anymore. It's football, we can watch it, we can mark it, we can put money into it, and we'll get money out of it. And it's I think, slowly, but we're moving towards it.
Yeah, now the Reggae Girls are no strangers to pay disputes with the Jamaica Football Federation. We were talking about it earlier, Flo, and we were saying it's actually quite hard to keep up to date with what's going on and what the current situation is, because actually there's not a ton that's being reported on it. We don't know if they have, obviously it was huge that they made it to the World Cup. That was a massive achievement. But they hadn't been paid for quite a while after. We're not quite sure where that is at the moment. If they have been paid, apparently they've been paid, what was it, 70, 80%?
Yeah, the latest thing we read earlier was from one of the local newspapers was, the JFF said they've paid 80%. Whether or not what they've said has happened, we don't know, because that's the official federation's line. But yeah, and that 80% was also, paid by the Marlies. So that's actually, again, it's this charity sort of element. It's, the federation in a way are saying, well, we can't afford it, so they're just hoping that someone else might decide to pay for it. And they can't afford it probably by choice rather than, necessarily what they're doing to support the team. And I think it's kind of symptomatic of the whole of women's football right now, is you basically, it's the haves and the have-nots, and you choose to do it with the backing of someone, or you don't support that. And all the ones that have decided to support it, well, surprise, surprise, they're being really successful. So,
well, I think that goes back into the system for women's football. I think if Jamaican men's team weren't paid 80%, you'd hear about it, and there'd be there'd be a recourse through the FIFA system, where FIFA would then support the players in getting that money to them. Again, it's not set up in that way. So hearing about it depends on the players tweeting about it or put it on their Instagram. And we become desensitized because so many other women's players are doing that. And we scroll past and we go, oh, another issue in women's football where players not getting paid. So there's so much emphasis on players having to speak out.
Yeah.
Rather than the system actually protecting them when these things happen.
Okay, so the Reggae Girls are not the first to go on strike. We've seen it quite a lot, but we'll talk about the most recent strike in Spain. So in the Primera division, over 200 players went on strike over pay, over working conditions, maternity time as well. And then afterwards, the Spanish Players Union and Football Federation, talks between them, reopened. So do these strikes work?
Yes, but they're not taken lightly. Everything before the strike was ongoing. It's about 13 months of talks and they didn't get anywhere. Like when Denmark went out on strike, that was a year of talks and it didn't get anywhere. So it's the final solution. We have to do something drastic. And it's never a decision that's taken lightly. And Spain, it was very complicated because it's about quite a few different things. And there are loads of players involved. I mean, literal players, but different unions as well, which makes everything's very, very complicated.
Do you think we're going to see it happen more and more?
I think there's definitely a trend of players standing up collectively and saying we're not having this. Whether it's Australia, whether it's New Zealand coming out about their coach, whether it's the US equal pay, whether it's obviously Spain, whether it's Denmark. There's teams across the world that are doing it. But I think that's what it takes. It takes a collective of 200 players saying we. And I feel a lot of pride in that because I think as women, unfortunately, whether it's football, whether it's equal pay, whether it's business, whether it's corporate, that's what women have to do. You have to take a stance and say, we have to stand and make sure this change happens. It shouldn't happen, as Sophie said, like the right decision should just be made. But unfortunately, we're just not there yet in terms of federations caring enough to do the right thing first without the players having to stop their careers, basically, in order to... And the thing is, what upsets me is that the players are never asking for like billions and millions and billions.
Yeah.
They're just asking for like...
Basically, minimum wage is what they were asking for in Spain. Is they were giving full-time to that and they were just asking, look, if we're full-time footballers, can we have a minimum wage? Yeah. Like, it wasn't anything crazy, and like injury pay and stuff. But
it's also utilising the media. I think now, stories about women and equal pay, and those are media kind of friendly stories. Yeah. And so it's players being savvy enough to say, okay, collectively, we're going to use the media to make sure that this is an issue, that's a current issue. And it usually embarrasses the federations to do something. That's what it takes, unfortunately.
Yeah, and in May 2020, the United States women's national team have a trial. Yeah, so they've filed, 28 players have filed a lawsuit against US soccer over pay again. Do we think they will win?
I feel like I don't know enough about the US legal system to say whether or not they will win. I think they have a good chance based on the responses from the US Soccer Federation, which have all been fairly weak and kind of tit for tat responses towards them and kind of diminishing their cause. A bit like Eni said, like a lot of what the US team are doing is not really for themselves. A lot of those players are on pretty good pay packets, whether that's their domestic club or their international salaries, and they've admitted that. You know, some of them make at least $1 million a year, but it's really for the legacy of the players that will come after them, because they need that support system. And as being the most successful international women's team in the world and one of the most successful football teams in the world, really they do deserve more.
I think they will win, because if they don't, I think that sets a precedent for many other sports. Yeah. If you are factually earning more money than the men, what is the reason?
They're so much better.
It's not even that's probably a matter of opinion whether they're better. Obviously, they've won World Cups and titles, but you are literally bringing in more money. So if you're bringing in more money, even just on a sort of normal level at any job, you'd be on more, or have a justification to be on more money. So it shouldn't even really be an argument. So I think they will win, but it's just sad that it's taken so long and they have to go to the high courts to figure it out. But I think once that's won, hopefully, it will be a sea change for the rest of the game.
Do you think, how big of an impact do you think it would have on women's football everywhere? Well, but then this is the problem, though, because then we've just spoken about reggae girls who, are currently having to fundraise themselves.
I think a lot of it depends on the country as well, and
what
how
they've got.
Yeah, exactly. What they got, the history behind it. They're just kind of ecosystem for women's sport that already exists. Yeah. I mean, I think the Matildas also had the kind of precedent that had been set by other sports. I mean, Netball Australia have got one of one of the best kind of setups contractually for their players. They've got really good maternity cover, so lots of players decide to take some time off and have children. They've got really good injury pay. They've got a minimum contract of, I think, 35,000 Australian dollars. So they were set up a couple of years ago, their professional league, with really good standards. And they've set a standard for other Australian women's sport, and Cricket Australia, the women's players, decided to strike a little bit between contract negotiations to get their maternity cover. So it will set a precedent domestically, I think, for other leagues to take that on. But internationally is a bit difficult because there's just not necessarily a history for women's sport that can be kind of carried over and copied.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Matildas, quickly, because look, we're making it all very doom and gloom. Oh no, everything's really bad. But obviously, we've seen so many positives last year in the women's game, and the Matildas, like you were just saying, Flo. That's been quite huge because now their top players are going to be on the same as the top Socceroos, so that the men's players, and of course, I think one of the biggest things is that they will have equal commercial revenue. They'll get equal commercial revenue. I mean, that is huge, right?
I think that's the part actually that is really a game changer.
Yeah.
Because I think the salary is about £100,000.
I think it's between 60 and
yeah.
$100,000.
So it's not, the Australian men's team are probably not sort of cash rich either. It's not a big men's team, but I think the commercial element is what really makes it different, because that's where these federations make a lot of money. So being able to say when that deal is done with the federation, that equally gets split. So it's really great to see Australia being sort of one of the leaders in doing that. I know Norway have got an equal pay deal as well. And I don't understand why these federations don't see the value in actually being the first to do it. Because everybody talks about it. Everyone's like, wow, Australia, go. And that is huge. And I think that's where England need to continue to try and be forward thinking and see how they can forge a way to let everybody else follow, because it really does shape what the world looks like in terms of women's football if you continue to kind of push things on and move things on rather than keep making excuses for not doing it.
Right, so of course we are talking all about money in this episode. I wanted to speak to you, Eni, about an organisation that you joined last year called Common Goal. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so Common Goal is a collective of players that can donate a minimum of 1%. So you can donate more if you want. And basically there is a collective of kind of philanthropic endeavours throughout the world that are used through football to change different things in the world. So for example, I was really keen to get involved to try and help female empowerment around the world. I'm really passionate about water projects in Africa, and also just general development and education through football. So you can be quite specific about where your money goes through your football salary and your football endeavours. So again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about players collectively being a force for change in football. I think we're at a place now where players are using their voice way more, including in the men's game. You've got people like Raheem Sterling, Megan Rapinoe really using their platforms to speak to world issues. Because a lot of us as players, we have almost more power and more followers than actual media organisations themselves. So when we speak to an issue and we put our money where our mouth is and we say, right, I really care about female empowerment around the world of female education, that changes. So I think Common Goal is a really powerful tool to do that, and I'm really happy to be part of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you must be proud to be making a change.
Well, if you see some of the players and the people that are involved, obviously Juan Mata was one of the first. You've got Jurgen Klopp, Megan Rapinoe, all in a WhatsApp group, and I'm like,
are you? Jurgen Klopp? Stop it.
Might text them.
What, you're all in a WhatsApp group?
Yeah, we've got big...
Shall we FaceTime Jurgen?
Let's do it now. It's probably about 200 odd people on that group, and it's really powerful because everyone's really positive. Like when I joined, I was on the WhatsApp group and I got lots of messages like, welcome to the family, and it very much is that, obviously, common goal. The common goal is to change the world through football, and it sounds lovely, but it's true. Like that's what it's all about.
Okay, that is all we have time for. Look, we could talk about this all day, but we are not allowed, according to these guys. So thank you so much. quickly tell everyone where they can follow you on social media, not in person.
Well, I'm kind of on Twitter. I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter.
Oh,
So
yeah,
Twitter,
don't
we
I'm
all?
Eni Aluko. On Instagram, much prefer Instagram, Eni Aluko. Not very good on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's it.
LinkedIn,
Wow.
that's a different one.
LinkedIn.
Very official.
Very business. Floyd Tweet
Lawyer.
on Twitter and Floyd Insta on Instagram. Simple.
At Lawson, Lawson _SV on Twitter. Loads of weird travel adventures if you want to follow me. Instagram, same as well, just really boring on there though.
There you
Cats.
go. Delightful. Way to sell yourself. Right, that is it from us. Remember, you can get in touch. You can tweet us at Copper90 and you can join our Facebook group, Football is Football. And do leave your comments because we love to hear from you. Until next time, that's a tea.